When this whole crisis started, a lot of our clients and partners and friends, reached out to Skookum and asked us about working remotely and doing remote workshops. We as a team put together a lot of content. This is kind of an aggregation of a lot of thoughts from a lot of different people. And again, looking forward to any questions you might have today. And just some concerns and other themes. And there's even themes since we wrote that content that has emerged. So we'll touch on Zoom fatigue today as well, and some of the other things people are experiencing personally, because we really want our customers to have their employees be well, be able to serve their customers, and then have the people that work there, be able to have a good life outside of work too. So feel free to shoot as many questions as you want to Brad or myself, or leave them in chat. We'll address them as we go through. So the first thing that we thought about, Skookum's always had this perspective. We try to be a remote first company, and we've talked about that. We have an office in Denver. We have a group in Atlanta, kind of folks scattered around the United States. Just as we need the right skill sets, we try to find those people, and our clients are all over too. So we've really had to build a structure around this. And I've got a theme today that you guys will find, and Brad knows this well. We did a podcast yesterday. He's giving me a hard time that it was the longest he's ever sat in a meeting with me, because I think it went 40 minutes. I generally am not a big believer or lover of meetings. And so I wanted to start with this gentleman here, Northcote Parkinson. He was a management professor. Northcote is a great name. If anyone has a kid about to be born, or like an animal, I think it's just an awesome name. And he's famous for Parkinsons Law, which is work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. He also came out with something called the law of triviality, which is the time spent on any item of the agenda will be an inverse proportion to the sum of money involved. And this one isn't him, but I read an article the other day. It stuck with me. 80% of the time of 80% of the people in meetings is wasted. And I think this is a theme I wanted to start with, just because it touches on a lot of aspects of this, because most remote work is about how to work through meetings and planning and communication and transparency with people. So the point of all that is, there's a lot in our culture that's built around meetings. It's built around communication. One of my favorite quotes I have is that the only, people hate meetings, but they hate being left out of them even more. And, we have this, we all want to be included. We kind of have meeting FOMO right now. And so managing these and being a part of these is great. And it keeps communications between our teams, but we have to balance it between burning ourselves out. And I'll talk a little bit about kind of Zoom fatigue and how that plays in. But when you are using a video and you're collaborating with people, what are the things you can do well? The first one we focus on is really setting the stage around you. So use video. A lot of communication is nonverbal. We use hand motions like I do. You can see kind of little turns on people's faces. You watch how you react to them. And so be the first person on your team to have video on. Turn it on when you go in. A lot of people, there's kind of this tipping point of, everyone joins a meeting and they kind of wait for someone to turn their video on, and they might go with it, they might not go with it. But if you're the first one in, everyone will think, oh, this is a video meeting. Now, some of us work at companies where that's not possible. We've got VPN concerns, bandwidth concerns, so we have to respect that. The second thing we do is limiting distractions, but also owning them. It happens to all of us. We've all got kids running around. We've got pets that are sitting on our laps. We've got dogs barking at people going by. We've got Amazon deliveries and grocery deliveries and doorbells ringing. And try to avoid them, but just own them. Say, hey, I'm probably going to get interrupted by a dog barking during this, or I'm probably going to have a kid, pulling on my pant leg, asking me to go play outside during this. Just own it. Like, be a human. Like, understand that all of us are humans. We all have a strange situation, and really lean into it. This third one is supposed to say be involved, not be involved, but really limiting multitasking. This is the big temptation. And when you're not sitting around a conference room looking at people and you're on your computer and an email comes in, a chat comes in on Slack, it's really tempting to kind of like take this and go over here and just start doing this. And before you know, you've missed 5 or 10 minutes of the meeting until someone asks you a question. You say, oh, can I repeat that again? And this goes back to our introduction of, with Northcote Parkinson, is this is an opportunity to like use COVID not to like just repeat all the same habits we had in the office of meetings, of everyone being involved, But really, if you're going to multitask in a meeting, don't join. Like if you're not going to be involved the whole time, ask someone to just send you the meeting notes afterwards you can review. And if enough people don't do that, like it's really hard in these big meetings for everyone to be involved, everyone to be on the same page. And if you find yourself multitasking, not paying attention, if the meeting's not important, don't join it. And so, Brad, I hope our numbers of people in this Zoom didn't just like drop precipitously because everyone realized they were just multitasking through this tech talk. But I mean, there are certain meetings where you just listen in. Sometimes it's like, well, having a course online or having the TV on in the background while you do laundry. Just be intentional with what your purpose is going into each meeting. And then this last one, sharing is caring until you make it weird. Just talk, like everyone's got a situation. Don't try to pretend that it's not happening. Share your personal situation. If you've got something on the wall behind you, a picture, tell stories. We've started kicking workshops off with questions like that. What's your new COVID hobby? What do you find spending your time doing? Pick a picture on the wall behind you and explain its significance and why you have it hanging there. It's weird having people in your home, but it's just going to be as weird pretending they're not. I'm going to pull up my phone real quick because there's a quote I saw the other day I loved from a management professor in Italy, and he said, "It's easier being in each other's presence or in each other's absence than in the constant presence of each other's absence." And so even though you're with people, you're not really with people, and you kind of have to accept that and you have to own it. And like being human, being personal is one way to do that. So kind of point here, set the stage as much as possible to limit distractions, have a good environment that you can move through. When it comes to presenting, and again, originally when we put this presentation together, we're a consulting company, so we're client oriented. So a lot of times we're presenting, we're pitching. There's an expectation that comes with that. So some of these might not be applicable for everyone. That your team, it might be okay to show up in sweatpants on every single call, versus for others it's not. And to the right we have John Stockton here, one of the kind of greatest NBA point guards of all time. And there's this idea, and we see this a lot on phone calls and conference calls, is you'll be on a call with 20 people, you'll finish presenting a presentation, and then someone will go, "That's our presentation. Any questions?" And you just hear silence, and we're in this massive kind of awkwardness vortex at this point, where like everyone is trying to time it perfectly, where they're not trying to interrupt everyone else, but they're not trying to be the first one to talk, and they're trying to defer to someone they think they should. And it just kind of floats out there. And humans hate awkward silence more than anything. And so we'll just sit there and someone will be like, "Okay, well, there's no questions, I'm going to move on." And like the host kind of has this moment of panic. And when you're all on video, when you've got this Brady Bunch view, when you're not on video, you really have to kind of think about it as a game of basketball where you're controlling the flow. And your job as a facilitator or a host is to always kind of keep the ball moving and make sure that you're never like rolling the ball out. You're always passing it to someone else. And so instead of saying, "Hey, that's my presentation, any questions?" If I was presenting to Brad, and Brad, I can see you right now, so that it's helpful. So thank you for keeping your video on. I would say, "Hey, that's our presentation. Brad, I know there were some concerns you brought up in the beginning of this. Is there anything that you'd like to address first? And then maybe we can see if there's any other questions from the group." So with that, I have handed the ball to Brad next. I haven't just kind of thrown it out in the room, and Brad knows it's his turn to speak. So there's no awkwardness, there's no strange handoff. And that's really important. The other thing that's key is I didn't put Brad's name at the end of that sentence. So this is like a very minor thing, but it helps a ton. I said Brad's name, and then I took 30 seconds and kind of like vamped. And then so Brad had time to like think of a question, he able to think of an answer. Whereas I went, "Okay, I'd like to open it up for questions. And the first person I'm going to have ask a question is Brad, go." And like Brad's like, "Oh man, I wasn't ready for that. I'm not ready." And as Brad mentioned, a musician, and when you're playing music and when you're playing jazz or something like that, you take turns soloing with people. And usually kind of the polite courtesy is 16 bars, which 20 to 30 seconds before you're done soloing, you kind of nod to the next guy in the band on whose turn it's going to be next. But then if that person needs a minute to prepare, the band just kind of vamps behind it. And so as that, you're the band leader of the call, you have to like vamp behind the music until that person's ready. So you're not setting people up for these really awkward moments. And we've all been on those calls where it gets weird and everyone's talking over each other and you can't tell whose turn it is and you don't really get the feedback. And really making sure you're pulling the feedback out of people. I was in a breakout group with a lot of product people, and product feedback is already difficult enough. A lot of people don't always know how to give it. Design feedback's always difficult enough. And so I, make sure you pass the ball. The other thing is make sure you share the ball. If someone's on the call, hand them the ball. If there's one dominant voice, take the ball away from them, give it to someone else, get their thoughts out. It goes back to that original point. Everyone on the call is going to want to contribute in some way. And so make sure that they have a chance to do that. Brad, we've had a few questions come in. Anything we want to address yet?
Yeah, there was a question on, can we define VAMP?
What?
Can we define VAMP?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a vamping, I'm really tempted to just go do it on the piano right now, is where instead of playing the main chord progression, you're just playing like a repetitive kind of little rhythm that once someone's ready, the band just goes back into it. So it's like a repeated little like phrase, like I'm waiting, I'm waiting, I'm waiting. It's kind of like the hold music of jazz is the way I would think about it. So sorry, I was not originally planning on any jazz references today, so that was a little out of nowhere. This last one, I like this as a way of kind of summing up this section is, I saw this is on Etsy. I'm not a representative or a reseller. I get no marketing credit for this, but I saw this. It's the little things you can do to set up your environment, but at the same time, I love this because it's asking people to be quiet, but it's also kind of like owning the situation that we're all in right now, and we're all humans and we all have very human things going on. So, be a human and lean into it. The next question and I'm going through a lot of content so that we can get to the Q&A and hopefully some breakout rooms. The next thing we've got a lot of questions about is facilitating remote workshops. And the really important thing is these are remote workshops, not virtual workshops. And a virtual workshop, usually people are still in an office. They still have things like childcare, or they still have schools going on. You might have multiple people in one room. You might have a Cisco telepresence versus having, everyone on a 12-inch MacBook Air, maybe not a second monitor. They're trying to do multiple things at once. And so it's not the rules for virtual, it's the rules for remote. And this carries from our previous set of rules. But a couple of kind of key things for workshops. Everyone's heard, Jeff Bezos talk about the 2 pizza rule, which is, the right number of people for a meeting is the number that you can feed with 2 pizzas. That's really true right now. If you can really limit the number of people, those breakout rooms that Brad does are fun. They're not the easiest thing to like jump in and out of and facilitate the whole time. And, setting up a lot of breaks and having people join video, unjoin, rejoin, it's really tough. So if you can have everybody in one spot, limit the number of people on it, it helps a lot. The second thing is the luxury of 5-day marathon, 8 hours a day, catered lunch workshops is a luxury no more. People have to make their own food. They have to take care of kids. They have to walk animals. If you're like the people that were in my group, you have a long list of things in the house that are broken that you want to use this as a chance to fix. So you have to really respect that and be really intentional. Shorten your weeks, shorten your days. I would recommend no more than a 2-day workshop during this time. And probably no more than 4 to 5 hours in a day. There's a lot of research that says thought capital oriented work is you really max out at 6 hours a day anyways. And after that, there's pretty significant diminishing returns. Our standard 8-hour work week is usually built more around kind of a model of physical labor in a day. And so be really respectful of people are stressed. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of mental health issues right now. Like, don't overtax someone so that at the end of the day, they're already exhausted and then they have to go start the second half of their day taking care of the things at home. So be really respectful of that, and limit your screen switching. So get everything in one place. I'll show an example of that in a moment, but rather than handing a lot of things back and forth to people, we use Mural, we use Miro, we use Whimsical. If you can get all your slides, all your materials in one place, like you no longer have the luxury of a room where you're hanging journey maps on the wall and personas on the wall and you have these massive whiteboards. You have to be really intentional about setting up your template beforehand. And this is a zoomed out view of, this is like a week-long discovery. So thanks to one of our teams for letting me borrow this unbeknownst to them. But this is an example of like how much setup our team did, and like all the materials and the agendas and the work. And you can see there's like 6 people in this editing it like live as it was happening. And so a couple of things there, you know, and I'm going to kind of bounce back between a couple slides here. Picking the right problem is really important. Like, now is not the right time to get fancy. Design thinking can be overdone these days. And so you're not like, don't try to pick problems that aren't going to feel timely. It's going to feel like a waste of time. People are really sensitive to their time right now. You really need to have templates set up beforehand. So have your research, have example templates, have your workspace set up. Where are you going to take notes? Who's taking notes? Is it multiple people? Is it one people? And test your technology, or reserve the first 10 minutes of every, or not every minute, every session to figure it out. And then a couple other tips with this. Good exercises. If you're doing stuff on paper, generally everyone has paper and a Sharpie or a pen at home. Have them upload the pictures to a single person and put them in a board. Don't do the thing where you're like holding up a piece of paper and like people are trying to read it while you're looking at it like this and they've got their face. It's awkward. Post-it notes are still great. A lot of these tools are great with Post-its. Prototyping and testing, you're better to take that offline and hand that to a designer or someone that can wireframe really quickly. Someone who's used a wireframing tool can accomplish as much as probably 5 or 6 people working together if they know their way around it. And then capture as you go. Make sure that you're digitizing your notes the whole time. So the panic that normally happens at the end of most workshops is you got all these Post-it notes at the wall, and one person's going around and they're grabbing them all and they're trying to put them in an Excel spreadsheet. Anything that's important, make sure you capture it as you go. I like to, when we're doing a digital workshop, build in the break time. And during that break time, someone is kind of capturing, they're summarizing, and they're using that to start the next exercise. With breaks, as you're planning your agenda, be really clear, like what's a breakout versus what's a break. A lot of times you'll lose people in transition. So if you try to go to a small group meeting and then, you know, half of that group uses it as a bathroom break, the other half goes to get food, and then they come back, but they were supposed to be getting something done and bring it back to the group. Like, be really distinct, really clear about language, and give people long breaks. Like, no working over lunch. Make sure a break gives them time to go visit with family. You know, just be very clear, be very crisp. Try to have them just like leave the Zoom meeting on so you don't have people bouncing in and out of the Zoom meeting the whole time. Those are some of the big ones around workshops, and would be curious to explore like how people have been doing with workshops. And we've got some of our experts on the phone too who can speak from experience. You know, a lot of our clients they went remote on a Thursday or Friday afternoon, and on Monday we had to be prepared to kind of do fully remote workshops with teams that were working from home for the first time. So I'm happy to share anything we've learned the hard way with people going through that. Brad, before I move to the next section, any other questions or terms that I used that I should have defined during that time?
I think we're good right now. Not seeing anything in the chat, but again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to add to the chat here. Awesome. So yeah, we do have, well, actually somebody just added, David asked, is there a suggestion for an app to digitize written notes?
So the simplest one is Jamboard by Google. It's, you know, just like a lot of Google tools are kind of stripped down versions of Adobe or Microsoft tools like Jamboard. It's the easiest to get up and running with. We use 3, so Miro, which used to be Real-Time Board, Mural, and Whimsical. Whimsical has the lowest learning curve and is probably the simplest to get up and using. Mural and Miro are a little bit more kind of equivalencies. They're both more powerful than Whimsical and a lot more custom, but potentially has a little bit of a higher learning curve. So we kind of took all of our projects from the past where we'd use Whimsical, and we came up with like 20 or 25 use cases and built templates for our teams. And our team really likes it. You know, our engineers use Whimsical to build architecture diagrams that they're dropping in. So it's just a lot easier than like a Visio, but you can do wireframing and stuff in that. So we were a very early adopter of Whimsical, and our teams really enjoyed how quick it is. You can pick it up in 30 minutes, 45 minutes and build some good templates.
Cool. We had another question around the platform that you showed the screenshots from, the collaboration one. I think that was Mural. Is that right?
Yes.
Cool. Great. Yeah, those are all the questions for now, Jace.
Awesome. So I want to get into some of the more kind of personal aspects of working from home. And actually, Brad, I'm not sure when it'll be out, but Brad, Josh, and I had a good talk about this for the Skookum podcast. So a little plug for the Squadcast that'll be coming out here soon. So some of the quick tips. Work-life balance is challenging at the best of times. And, in these times, it's even harder. And, life seeps into work and work seeps into life. And I want to say these recommendations are pretty high level. If you're someone with, 4 kids in a house, if you're living with your significant other in a studio apartment in New York City, if you're in a noisy apartment complex, if you have roommates, these are very, very different situations. And you really have to kind of figure out what's going to work for your own personal situation. The quick tips is make sure you still go to work so that you can go home. I try to pick a time when I'm going to work. I say, hey, I'm going to work now. And, I still, it sounds like Josh and Brad aren't into this, but I still shower in the mornings, and I still put pants on just to like, hey, I'm kind of going to work and I feel like I'm going to work. I go into my office. The only thing I really try to do in there is work. I've kind of taken everything else out of there that I might do. And when I'm done for the day, I close Slack, I close my email, I close my calendar, I close all the open tabs. And I pick up my computer and I take it out of my office and I put it at the kitchen table, which is actually where I'm sitting right now. And that's important because that way, if I want to check something on my computer later, I don't open it up and work is looking at me. Because if you open up your computer and there's like a new email, it's like, oh, a new email, like, oh, and then you kind of, oh, well, let me just filter through my email. And before you know it, your work has kind of bled into your home life. And really focus on creating those boundaries. I've talked to a lot of people and they're actually saying how much more efficient they are now than ever. And so there's an opportunity there, if you can, getting rid of your commute, getting rid of some of the potential distractions that normally happen in the office, work a 4 or 6 hour day, like knock your work out sooner, get all of your work done, and move on. It's really easy to fall into this. Well, I'm going to kind of have the TV on, I'm going to kind of work. And it's very easy to kind of fall into that. The second thing with that is take breaks over blending. So if you're going to go have lunch, get up and go have lunch and go sit and like leave your computer where it was and get out of the quote office, go for a walk. I love that people are like going for runs during the day. Don't try to call in, to a call and go for a run. Like tell people, hey, I'm taking a break. I need to recharge. It's very fatiguing being inside and it's easy to be able to sit down at your computer and not look up until the end of the day and doing that. And then the other thing would be kind of create rituals. Some people might call them habits. Still getting up in the morning, it's very tempting. And Josh and Brad and I were talking about this last night to kind of like just fall into your workday. You're sitting on the couch, you open up your computer. It's easy to say, well, since I can just wake up later, I don't really need to have a morning routine. But if the first thing you do every day is wake up and just start working, like there's no break, there's no morning time. And those rituals are really important. There's a great article on BBC right now. I think it's like tips from an astronaut about how they dealt with isolation and routine. And they had their days blocked out to down to 5-minute increments of these routines around exercise and the rituals that they did to look forward to and how they pass the time. So if you can make sure that you've got a time where you get up in the morning, the other thing this helps with, like the number one thing for personal health and work health right now that you can do is get sleep. And just like it's easy to let the morning blend into work, it's easy to say, well, I'm just going to stay up a little later because I don't have to wake up as early as I used to. And now you're not getting the sleep that you used to. You're off your normal routine. Your body's not awake when it needs to be. You're not ready to work, and that causes you to have to work longer hours, and you get into kind of this death spiral. So that's really important. The other thing is the mental health side of this, and so I've got photo credit over here to Josh Miller, who's leads our engineering at Skookum. This is our leadership team. In the Brady Bunch view, and Jeremy is showing us what not to do there in the bottom left by multitasking. But the Zoom fatigue is a very real thing. And there's a lot of psychological reasons for that. And so if you think about if there's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you think about this group of people on the right having a normal conversation in a conference room, and our president, Joe, is talking in the upper left. Normally, if I'm in a conference room with all these people and I'm talking to Joe, I'm making eye contact and I'm watching Joe because he's the speaker. And everyone else is watching Joe. But now with this view, I'm having to do intake from, 10 different people, including myself. You're kind of seeing what yourself is doing, which is a weird thing. I'm watching all of their body language. That's a lot of visual input for your brain to handle, and it becomes very hard to focus. And so that gets us into the second point, which is called optimal distinctiveness. And so there was a social psychologist in the 90s named Marilyn Brewer. And she came up with this theory of optimal distinctiveness. And it's basically like people want to have an identity that fits into a group, but they also want to feel distinct, that they stand out from. And so if you take a college, for example, if you go to a small college, like just going to that college might give you enough distinctiveness where that's your identity. But then most times you go to college and you kind of separate into different groups. Maybe you're an athlete versus you're someone that does clubs, or you're in the band, or you're in Greek life. And maybe like Greek life is enough for your distinctiveness. But then, oh no, I'm just part of this one group. And they found like between 20 and 150 people is generally what gives people identity. But the kind of the important takeaway here is, just like you need a small enough group to feel like you stand out and you matter, like people need to feel like they're participating. Otherwise they zone out. And so if you have 10 people like we have on the right in a conversation or a meeting, and that you're just there for 30 minutes, everyone gets to speak or share for 3 minutes. And a lot of kind of social relationships is built around like sharing and building on things. I joke here, never have more than 6 people at brunch and engage intentionally. But if you've ever been to like a big dinner or a birthday dinner or brunch, it's, we don't all sit around a big table and like one person speaks while all 9 other ones watch and wait their turn. You subdivide into 2 groups of 5, or, a couple groups of 4, or even groups of 2. Even if you go on like a double date, a lot of times 2 people will end up talking to each other while there's another conversation, and the conversations will merge. And in Zoom, you can't really do that. You can do these breakout rooms, but it's not organic like conversation normally evolves. If you think about going to a brewery with your friends where it's loud, you'll be sitting next to 1 or 2 people and you talk to them, and then you get up and you go talk to someone else. And so it's really hard to do that. And so sometimes the only thing you can do is step away. And we talk, the only thing people hate more than meetings is not being invited. And that can be meetings at work. That can be your social time. If you have a lot of friends that are doing happy hours and game night and poker night, it can be overwhelming, and a lot of people are getting very burned out. And so the 4th point here is pivot. Don't just pick up your old life and try to live it on the internet. Like, this is a time we're all going through, and we've all been impacted differently, and kind of COVID has taken a very indiscriminate cut through society in terms of the haves and have-nots right now. We all know someone that's been impacted, whether their health or their finances. And this is a time where you can't replace your old life perfectly, and you have to kind of live a new life for this period of time. Make the best of it. There's going to be shortages. There's going to be shortcomings, but the kind of the channel of digital is not a replacement for everything you did before, and it has to be about kind of building some new habits. And so this last one, the physical side of things. Write a letter to a friend instead of texting them or watching social media. Go walk and talk. I know a lot of people are doing yard work. If you're on Nextdoor, it's pretty funny to watch everyone complaining about the timing and sounds of yard work, and they don't want you to do it during the workday. They don't want you to do it in the evenings. They don't want you to do it during church time on Sundays. And so there's a massive like Nextdoor conspiracy debate on when it's acceptable to like weed whack or mow your lawn. Do a puzzle, but again, just take this time if it's possible to make sure that you're kind of doing something beyond the normal, and you're creating a new life for this time. You're not just trying to maintain your old life, because like hanging on to that is going to be really difficult, and you really have to accept it. The last thing, just if anyone is feeling kind of isolation, there's a really good book called Flourish or it's not new, but Martin Seligman, this is two pictures of him on the right. I like the one on the bottom because he looks really happy, and you can tell why he developed a theory of happiness if at one point in his life he got to dress like that. He developed what's called perma theory, which he was kind of one of the founders of positive psychology. And so the 5 factors, PERMA, that are important to kind of authentic happiness and success and well-being are positive emotions. So this comes from, things like eating food or watching something. So these are kind of like the more temporary, like positive events in your life. Engagement, and engagement is also called flow, if you're familiar with flow theory. And engagement's really important for our happiness. It's the ability to lose yourself in an activity that you're doing. So whether it's your work or a hobby, or playing a video game or reading a really good book, like having something that you can lose yourself in is going to make the time go by a lot faster. Relationships are as important as ever, finding ways to genuinely connect with people. Meaning, so feeling like your life has purpose. There's a lot of different ways you can help, a lot of different ways you can volunteer, support local businesses. And then finally, the last thing that's really important is achievement. And so having goals that you can set, learning a new skill, finding something that you can spend your time doing. So all things that we can think about with this, and just a theory I've found useful when thinking about my life. So something I wanted to share with the group today. The last topic, and I know we've covered a lot today. Brad, any questions before I hit this one? And I'm going to probably take 2 minutes to cover this last one as thought starters and see what we go with.
Yeah, we just had one about the quote that you read from your phone about presence and absence. And maybe we can save that to the end, but just kind of reiterating that one. So.
Yeah, so the quote was, "It's easier to be in each other's presence or in each other's absence than the constant presence of each other's absence." And what that means is part of the reason why Zoom fatigue is really hard is the digital nature of seeing kind of friends, family, coworkers, and loved ones. Always kind of makes people seem close at hand, but it creates this distance, and it's a kind of a poor man's substitute a little bit. And so this constantly being exposed to what we're missing, it's kind of like a friends and family, like FOMO type feeling. And so by pulling yourself away from the news, by pulling yourself away from Zoom, and sometimes detaching intentionally versus having these constant reminders of what your life used to be can help long term.
That's great. That's all we got question-wise right now. So
cool. The last thing that we've had some questions about is what happens next. My company is going through this. What do we expect to happen? And so when we kind of put our kind of customer experience view on at Skookum, what does our team think about this? What are we seeing with some of our customers who we're helping with their COVID response? Playing the long game obviously is really important. Everyone's hurting right now. The other big thing is, depending on who you read, habits take between 20 and 60 days to form. And so COVID's going to have enough time for like really strong new habits to form that, and not some of them are going to go back, but like a lot of them are going to stick after this. I was listening to Freakonomics this week, and they're talking about the changes in food supply chain and online grocery ordering. There was a great Planet Money on like the cruise industry, which typically caters to kind of 70 plus, but they're expecting pretty much like they're wondering if like it'll take years and years for that to recover because of people's fear and like the type of travel they'll want to do. So really think about what habits are forming right now, and if you'll want to, like, if those are habits that you can, take advantage of and use. A lot of our customers, whether it's banking, healthcare, utilities, have been trying to get people to pay their bills online and register for e-statements so that they don't have to, spend a bunch of money on postage. What a great time to get your customers to finally adopt the online tools that you have. So, know that there's going to be some new habits. And then the other thing is like the bar has been set. You're not going to be judged just by what you do. You're going to be judged by what everyone else does. And so if all the other competitors in your industry are being nice and being forgiving and being empathetic during this time, and you're the jerk, like the bar to leave brands, when you can't engage with them, this is a time for disruption. Like when brands look to market towards people, they look for big disruptive events in their life. They look for people who are moving. They look for people who have just gotten married. They look for people who have just had a child. COVID is a massive disruption event. And so this is a time when people are going to allow their loyalties to change. They're going to change brands. They're going to work with new people, and the companies that, you know, not just in what their policy is, but how they talk about and explain their policy. Customers are going to remember this time. Like, this is going to be a generational shaping event. It's going to really impact our psychology for a long time. Brad, I saw a couple questions coming during that. I'm going to pause here. I just got one more slide. So I'll just finish this slide out. You know, you've heard a lot of people saying, you know, I can't wait for it to, quote, go back to normal. There is no going back. And I love this quote from Brazilian author Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist. When you can't go back, you have to worry only about the best way of moving forward. And to kind of to some of the points we were making before, like, things are not going to go back exactly to what they were. I mean, people are going to start eating out again. You know, they're going to go back to breweries, but there's going to be a lot of secondary and tertiary effects, and we don't know what they are all right now because we're in uncharted waters. There's no historical data to pull from. And so a lot of brands and companies are struggling because a lot of their models and forecasting is built on data. And right now we don't really have data to know what's going to happen. And so really developing strong models around empathy and understanding the jobs to be done of your product and how that's going to evolve from here is going to be what lets you not win, but move out of COVID in a position to kind of resume serving the needs of your customers and meeting the needs of your employees. So some things that I think are going to be challenged coming out of this, hierarchy. You know, we've got a very hierarchical society, whether it's in the government or whether it's in education or in our management structures and companies. We've seen a lot of like state and local municipalities like step up to the plate and not wait for federal government to make decisions to do the right thing for themselves. We've seen different educational models of more distributed education that were ready for this, and versus like higher ed really is not ready for this. And then management systems where a lot of managers who have managed on a, you know, I know you're working when I can see you when your butt's in a seat, you know, that model doesn't work anymore. The second thing is challenging bureaucracy. I've been amazed by the response of the community and companies being able to stand up new digital experiences in 2 or 3 days that normally would have taken 2 or 3 months just to meet about and prioritize. So I think a lot of organizations are going to realize they had a lot of kind of middlemen between decisions that were holding back innovation. And I'm hoping that, you know, we've challenged bureaucracy where we can cut through the red tape in the future. And then really defining success for our teams, you know, how we manage people and getting them to focus on the outcomes of what they do versus the outputs, and holding people accountable by giving them really clear visions of what success metrics are, and then giving them a chance to use creativity to address that. So I appreciate the time today. Brad, we've probably got time for a couple questions. I know this was kind of a COVID brain dump, but this is a special edition Tech Talk. So any feedback or any help is welcome, and we're happy to try to help folks.
Yeah, feel free to throw some more questions in on the chat, and I'll try to take them from there and ask them to Jason. So Jason, one we had here, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, was about especially larger firms and remote employees. Do you think they'll kind of rethink their stance on remote work, and yeah, what does that look like kind of moving forward as we get back to normal a little bit?
Yeah, it's already happening. Some of the firms, you know, probably one of the biggest challenges has been moving call centers and getting those people laptops and VPNs and system access, and not having the, you know, your kind of massive voice over IP phones next to everybody. And a lot of those firms that are moving people are not thinking of it just as a temporary move. Like, they're thinking of kind of mixed model ways of servicing customers and meeting their needs, because this has been a massive shock to the system. So I think that's going to happen. I think firms are going to have to, like, there was a lot of fear, like, that this was kind of the genie getting let out of the bottle for work from home. And a lot of companies that haven't been able to manage through true success metrics and have really kind of more micromanaged people, like, that's broken down. But then from the employee side, like, you know, people are going to realize I get a lot more done at home. Like, I feel much more efficient here. I like being here versus having to be in the office. I get much more done. So I think employees are going to pressure this from the bottom up just as much as managers are going to be top down. And you know, for me, I think about it, you know, like I grew up in mobile during the bring your own device of instead of having the company BlackBerry, people just wanted to have their apps on their iPhone or eventually Android device. And that came about because, people were like, my kids have cooler technology than I do. And it was, CEOs were sitting there and they're like, my kid has an iPhone and I'm sitting here on this old school thing. Why can't I use this? So I think now that people have a taste of what life could be like, now some people probably can't wait to get back in the office, I'm sure. But I think firms are going to have to address it long term.
Cool. There's another question just about how do you think this changes business for independent contractors? I know a lot of them were affected by this. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's, at first I thought it was the end of the gig economy, and now I think it's the true beginning of the gig economy. I think firms, like if you look at the hiring by like Amazon, Instacart, and like Domino's, obviously that's a different type of gig economy worker, but ramping up these jobs for delivery drivers really quickly. I think firms are going to realize like the flexibility of using contractors just for their business and being able to ramp up and down. So I think there will be more demand for it. A lot of companies are very uncertain around hiring. So I think even like the rest of this year, there'll be a lot of demand for contractors and those types of partnerships that give firms a little bit more flexibility from the finance side. I think it'll be really interesting or that's the demand side, but I think from the supply side, it'll be really interesting, just depending on the type of gig economy or independent contractor, just because of like the reliability of income, health insurance, being able to get really good unemployment benefits when something like this happens. So it's hard to say exactly how that'll be. I think it'll be pretty split. People that found success during this time, where their skills were high in demand versus people whose skills kind of completely dropped out of demand and they fell through the cracks. I have a lot of friends that are musicians and they make their income full time playing gigs at bars, and they're all trying to do Zoom meetings for tips right now. And it's horrible because like they're just as talented as they were a couple of days ago. They're just as skilled, but their place of business has been taken away. So I think you'll see I think it'll be very dependent upon the type of job and the type of skill set, and who you cater to from like a hiring standpoint. But I think overall, there's going to be a pretty interesting kind of debt crisis coming out of this. We're at our highest level of credit usage ever. We're not as exposed as we used to be in the mortgage market, but there's going to be some interest, the government's, put a lot of money aside for making sure that people don't have to pay mortgages for a couple months. But, I think the combination of, I think like 70% of Americans didn't have more than $1,000 in savings, with the number of, I think it's like 30% of the economy was gig economy. And I think there was 84 million part-time workers going into this. Those are some pretty big numbers, and that are going to have some pretty big intersectional effects.
So last question that we have here, Jason, is from like an organizational side of things. So do you have, obviously this was a lot about for individuals specifically, but do you have any suggestions and best practices for employers where remote work is new?
Yeah, I think making sure that you're training your managers on how to manage through holding people accountable to outcomes versus trying to monitor their activity, making sure someone's online for a certain amount of time. There's going to be a lot of people on the supply side of the job market. And so there's gonna be a lot of people like looking for jobs. There's going to be a lot of employers that have to ramp back up. So it's not really just how you treat your customers through this, but it's how you treat your employees. There's a great Richard Branson quote, employees first, customers second, shareholders third. And in customer experience, we always believe the best way to deliver a great customer experience is make sure your employees are treated well and they know what a great customer experience is. So I think, number one is making sure down to the, from top to bottom, every layer really understands their role in what success is for the company, and that you've given them a good understanding of that and given them the task of moving towards that versus just doing a job for the sake of activity that they're not built in. Daniel Pink's book, Drive, I would definitely recommend as one to read. It talks about the value of, autonomy and empowerment, kind of purpose and meaning, and then mastery as being the three skill sets that ultimately come together for someone to feel successful in a job. And so, empower people through knowing what success is, giving them room to move, not trying to micromanage them, not making them be on a meeting with you all day. Make sure people have training on using digital tools, learning how to use Zoom, learning how to use some of these new kind of online workshop tools. And then that purpose is help them understand how they're serving the customer, how they're serving the company, how they're helping someone. There's been a great outpouring of support, and people want to feel like they matter right now. So I would say that's a quick high level.